How you doing? Welcome to the show. I'm making this short introduction before we begin this episode to tell you what this is, and yeah, because we just dove right into this episode with Ananda Bosman, and it's just mind blowing, to say the least. So, for those of you who don't know, Ananda Bosman is well, he calls himself a somantic artist. We've been following him for quite a time. Josh, certainly more than I have. And well, in our hearts and minds, he is the mystic's mystic, the yogi's yogi, the Western mystic yogi that is way, way ahead of our time. In this interview, we just dove right into some pretty advanced stuff with Ananda, and he talked for almost 3 hours. At one point, if you're actually watching the video version of this interview, on our website or on YouTube, you can probably see the smoke coming out of my ears because I just completely checked out. I mean, it's just wild, and I'm trying to understand all this stuff. Ananda, we didn't get into his life story, which I really hope we can do a follow-up podcast to just cover his story, like in many other interviews he did, because we wanted to get into the juicy stuff. But in any case, if you haven't heard of him, Ananda, he was 15 years old. He had a near-death experience that really altered the course of his life and caused him to really remember why he was here, remember some really deep, profound past life influences and soul agreements and contracts that he came into this life with. And since then, he had been on an incredible journey of bringing forth to humanity, to our understanding, the true nature of how the actual dynamics of our universe and the mechanics of this seemingly real artificial holographic light show of consciousness actually really works. He has translocated in front of people, like actually teleported in real life. There have been many witnesses. He has also been inside of ET spacecraft many times, having many, many interesting experiences and adventures, which you may hear him talk about in this interview. I don't even remember at this point. Because it was very, very in depth, and we covered way more stuff than just ETs. And his whole take on that, ultra-terrestrials and super-terrestrials and extratemporal realities and extratemporal versions of yourself and extratemporal incarnations. Anyway, so that was just like my disclaimer. The guy totally blows our minds, and we love him. We really want to bring him out into the forefront because we think everybody should know about his work. Another really fascinating part of his work is bringing to the forefront the awareness of 432 hertz music technology, which you hear, I think, more about in this interview. But essentially, he's bringing forth a new harmonic scale that's actually in tune with the frequency of our hearts. The actual scale that we know and hear in music every single day is actually tuned to 440 hertz. And it's like most of the little twists and turns that make up the consciousness control grid on our planet. It is 99% true, but just that one little lie, and everything is out of harmony. And so he talks about that in his interview as well. If you want to learn more about him, go to www.432hertz.com to read about him and some more of his work. Anyway, without further ado, let's jump into the interview. I hope you enjoy it as much as we did, and I really hope you get your mind blown. Okay, ciao. Welcome to the Ever Podcast. Today with us, we are honored to have a very special guest, Ananda Bosman. You've heard in the pre-recorded interview, which we added onto the podcast as a brief intro. But I don't even know where to begin. Where do you want to begin?
Well, this guy is like blowing my mind. Like if you listen to any of his material on the internet right now, I think you already will know by now that you're in for a treat right now. We are gonna be getting our minds blown right now. So
well, it's a great pleasure to be with you both. You are gaining quite some repertoire with your work, which is pioneering work indeed. So it's a great pleasure to be amidst colleagues.
Thank you very much. Great honor to have you here.
Yeah, likewise. Really feel you as a brother, and I really want to dive into your stories. You really bring an immense amount of substance and experience and credibility to a lot of the topics which we are kind of, in a sense, skirting around with here in Vilcabamba, but we haven't really been able to get really, really deep into. So Where do we begin?
Yeah, where do we begin? Because I mean, there's so much to cover. So, could you tell just briefly a little bit about yourself, where you come from, and how you ended up working with all the things that you're doing?
The most simplest route that we use in public, if we meet in a city with some people or some artists, I say I'm a semantic artist and a musician working with 432 hertz and 8 hertz. As simple as that. The semantic artist part is very varied and very wide. So we come from a very specific background. I can go back to my childhood too, but initially a series of near-death experiences, like you, Josh, triggered really me as a teenager when I was 15. I had several near-death experiences before. I'd had certain types of encounters before, but the near-death experience that happened when I was in Dorset, England, in the outer Glastonbury Zodiac region, where I hit the front side of my head. I'm into BMX at that point, no pain, no gain. You're cycling up the hill, going through the pain barrier. Then you've got the endorphin rush, and that gets in the way. More willpower, more focus, and the chain comes off the bike, and everything goes in slow motion. I hit the front neocortex of my head. Everything spins, echoes. I'm in a golden sphere, surrounded by these golden light beings that are completely one with me. And there are these beams that are going off into the past, into the future. And the places they went into the past was where I went into the same golden sphere, but I disappeared physically when I was 2 years and 7 months old in the Swiss Alps. And in the future, it would be several other experiences I would have: a translation experience, also a future entheogenic experience, which surprised me because the entheogens acted not as a space outer, but rather as a grounder. It basically showed how all the internal universe of my teenage period, because after that bicycle accident, I started getting strong contacts, trainings, thousands of pages of information, periods of traveling, which I ended up calling extratemporal virtual reality, where I would go, through all these different planes, through the sun to parallel universes and these kind of things. But it included physical sightings, witnesses with sightings, landings, which you're quite familiar with. So the entheogenic experience came about by Buddhists. It was actually Tibetan Buddhists in Dzogchen who had a sacrament which was secret. This is actually secret to them, and sacred, I suppose. And it was very high dose. I believe in this, that when it is done, if it is done, when one spirit moves one, and it should, that's when one should do it. If not, then wait for the right time, if it is to come at all. Should be very high dose, and this was very high dose, and it brought me back to that sphere, that hypersphere, past, present, and future, and grounded me. So it showed me that basically everything I've experienced and learned on the so-called sapient cognizant planes applied to reality, but just with much greater diversity, and that now one could see the details of that diversity reflecting kaleidoscopically the all-oneness foundation of our cognitive satience. So there are many, many facets to this, and we do explore many, many facets, and it has to be a plurality, a myriad of facets that one dances and takes on in subject matter. We've been known to speak nonstop for 17 days on end. And we've done that just in Egypt alone, decoding the various hallway of records there. Also introducing in the Great Pyramid the wild rue or nebu, the plant of the baby Horus, according to Dioscorides, which contains harmine, quinoline, harmaline, lotarine, these kind of molecules, and local scint or acacia medane. So that combined, which grows all around the Great Pyramid and grows throughout the Nile and the Nile Valley, combined together with Orma good quality format in the Great Pyramid, 33 people, 1997, winter solstice, full night in 4 areas of the Great Pyramid with 72 Egyptian mantras. So that kind of confirmed the visions that would occur with people. Confirmed that when you are in a certain country or zone, the living archetypes, the living hypergenetic archives, so to speak, do emerge. So the imagery of the Great Pyramid was all these hidden tunnels and chambers, and of course the gods, the 49 gods and demigods, the Ennead, emerging for pretty much everyone. And I believe that will take place differently in different locales, because I think this reality is already artificial, but not in the way that we see artificial reality or simulated universe reality at present. I think it's way, way beyond that. But one notices as one crosses national boundaries that, for instance, the memories of German words, the German language, or the Italian language as you step into Italy, is suddenly there, along with archetypes. Now, that is supposed to happen with artificial intelligence in the future, where artificial intelligence, or Elon Musk's version, which is to hook up the brain directly to computers, both of which are I think competing models, which at the same time have their own troubles. Who wants an iPhone in their head? It will be out of date within 5 years, and all this stuff.
So when you mention artificial intelligence, are you talking about we are living now in a holographic universe, and that is the artificial intelligence? Because I recall you mentioning that nature is artificial. So what is organic, real, alive, and what is not? Is there a difference?
Well, I think ultimately what is animated, yes, it has a different set of mathematics which have been solved completely and totally. The problem with the really old physics, black and white physics, the old 1936 quantum physics, is that it only works with quantas, single quantas, and animated life forms. In the DNA, symmetry is never broken under 4.5 now. And so you have at least 4 quantas, impossible for quantum mechanics, because the symmetry is never broken when DNA replicates under 4. And that state of hypergenetics, as it's now called in modern hadronic mechanics, is operating in an extraordinarily complex equation called the hypertopic plane. Now, Dr. Steinar Johansen from Trondheim University is a colleague of ours. In 2013, published a paper where he resolved all number problems, including prime number problem, which is never solved before, and on the internet is still claimed to be unsolved, but he solved it. He solved it through a 512-dimensional arrangement of the number systems, completely and totally all number problems at 512K, or 512 dimensions, of 8 dimensions times 8 dimensions times 8 dimensions. Our body is so complex. We have so many mathematical equations just in a second. We have, on the microtubules, we have amino acids, we have minerals, we have enzymes bumping in, affecting the Bose-Einstein condensation, which is a form of biosuperconductivity. Then we've got the neurotransmitter level, we've got the organic level. So all of the mathematical equations are occurring at the same time in an animated life form. And just 1 second of that is 512 dimensional if you want to resolve it completely and totally. So 3D does not exist.
Okay, yeah.
This is part of the new emerging hard empirical evidence.
Okay, well.
And now when you take that then to plants, I think Sir Francis Crick, who hallucinated the double helix of the DNA at 100 micrograms of LSD, did tune into something, that is the DNA when it uncoils and just begins to recoil. You have fluorescence readings that will give you a rough approximate of the DNA, and he was obviously able to home in on that. He did permeate through the possibilities of evolution on planet Earth, and even by panspermia. So by 1975, he says life on planet Earth cannot have happened naturally. It cannot have happened either by panspermia, you need about 11 billion years for the complexity and variety of life as it is here. So he suggested an extraterrestrial probe. I see it more simple or more complex than that. We are actually a super civilization and hyper civilization. This super and hyper civilization has put together an entertainment system, has modulated that entertainment system, which is our present idea of planet Earth and parts of the musical architecture of our solar system, and it is perfectly geometrical, animated by spherical projection of Kepler, following a 12-tone music cone, and having a golden proportion, an anabinomial sequence in its ordering and its dynamics, which is not natural. And the odds of that being natural are far and few between, like with the sun and the moon. I believe in our, because we're semantic artists, so we are free to speculate wildly and non-dogmatically, even though we may ascertain certainty. That's just the semantic art. So in this exploration, we think at present the sun and the moon as modulators of a series of waves, musical waves that construct a montage surface that we call planet Earth. That montage surface has scenario abstracts from the super and hyper civilization, which are overlain and which are permeating. It's hyperholographic, really. Genotopic holographic and hypertopic holographic to be accurate in modern hadronic mechanics and hadronic physics.
Just a quick question. So hadronic mechanics. How would you spell that? Because if somebody wants to research hadronic mechanics and dive more into it, where would they go to learn more about this?
Okay, hadronic mechanics was really founded by Ruggiero Maria Santilli, a hero scientist from Italy who lives now in Miami. He was able to introduce completely new planes to mathematics that would unify all mathematics. He was at Harvard and he was at the University of Torino. And so as he introduced the isotopic plane in 1986, within 4 years, the biological sciences was able to use that to try and simulate life forms, simple life forms. Dr. Chris Illert from Australia took conch shell morphologies. And he tried to model conch shell morphologies with Euclidean mathematics, with Platonic geometries in an animated form, but they just crumbled and fell apart. So it didn't work. Then he discovered the isotopic and genotopic, that's the holographic universe, new models of mathematics and geometry of Dr. Ruggiero Santilli, which has also been applied into the mechanical sciences. New chemical molecules have been made into astrophysics, where antimatter is detected, etc. So it's many practical applications that have emerged from this mathematics. So he applied this to his computer modeling of conch shell morphologies. That's Dr. Illert. And it worked. 100,000 conch shell morphologies were modeled and looked like they were 3D, but they required 6 arrows of time. So what are the 6 arrows of time? In the present, you have a cube where you have forwards time and backwards time. In the future, you have a cube where you have backwards and forwards time. And in the past, you have a cube where you have forwards and backwards time. All these 6 arrows of time are utilized in the modeling of the conch shell morphologies to look 3-dimensional. So at least 6 dimensions of time, which means that the conch shells are time traveling. They're time machines from the past, the present, and the future, all being co-present. So the philosophical 3 questions: where do we come from? Who are we? Where are we going? Are not the question; they are the answer. They're interactive. And that's with a simple life form. That's not the complexity of what is going on in mammals and human beings. So 2 extra arrows of time were added by Illert. That is every point within the 4 cubes and the 6 arrows of time directly to an isohypersphere. The isohypersphere is an octonion. That's an 8-dimensional state where an octonion is a Mobius, is a single substance where 7 dimensions are, in fact, a single Mobius on that 8-dimensional octonion, and it's an isohypersphere. And it uses the iso lifting of the old Sophus Lie algebra. Sophus Lie is the man who introduced the invariant triangle, which, as you take the vertices of the triangle to infinity, goes into the torus. And from that, toroidal equations were developed. His friend was Dr. Felix Klein, who invented the Felix Klein bottle, the 4-dimensional Mobius strip, where a single surface incorporates the subjective, the objective, and the object as a single surface, which was 4D 100 years ago. And the two equations weren't reconciled. They have now been reconciled through hadronic mechanics. Hadronic, Hadronic, not the CERN Hadronic Collider experiment, which is using special relativity of Einstein at atomic densities, which is non-applicable, is science fiction pure, because in the special relativity theory of Einstein, point particles are traveling in a vacuum. When you go deep into the atom, you get anything but a vacuum. Within the nucleus of the atom, you get some of the most dense materials you've ever seen on this planet, and also the most energetic, as we see from the hydrogen bomb, which is fusion, and the atomic bomb, which is fission. So what you have there is you have an overlap of wave packets, the hadrons, that overlap in a torus, the 7 main hadrons, of infinite recursion. And that infinite recursion means that those 7 hadrons with their wave packets overlapping as a hyperdense media are in the heart of every atom, everywhere, and every when, past, present, and future. Hypertopically, that means also other planes, endless amounts of universes. They will be at the heart of the atom there too.
It's very interesting you're using the word in the heart to describe the center. Because I mean, if you go in and look at the ancient scriptures of the Vedas, they're talking about the tiny space of the heart, the center of the heart, which is where all creation comes from. And so
I've gone quite deep into the Vedas. My experiences after the near-death experience was with ultra-terrestrial, for want of a better word. Today we can use ultra-terrestrial because the Urban Dictionary, for instance, defines ultra-terrestrial to include humans in the future that start time traveling. It includes interdimensional theory, parallel universe theory. I don't think we're talking about ET per se here. I think that's just a graphic interface for those who experience it that way.
So basically, the ultra-terrestrials is us.
In part, it's us and the observer in the heart of our consciousness.
Yes.
And that is unique. Everyone is not equal, but everyone is unique by being unique. And that uniqueness is absolute. So we're a unique personification of this super and hyper civilization. Beyond that, the unification of these super and hyper civilizations as something that is really in epistemology, theology, termed the anthropos, which very much relates to the field of anthropic principle physics, even subanthropic principle physics of Dr. Beatriz Gato Rivera of CERN, who introduced the subanthropic principle to deal with the Fermi paradox of where is everyone. Of course, that was a whole subject unto itself to dive into. So we were having these experiences, manifestations, materializations, going into vehicles, translations of the body, in redigitalization of the body in seconds, where in front of others you're invisible. First you're blue, then there's only some particles remaining, and then they put the hand there and there's just nothing there. My own experience then is being in a network of emptiness and oneness at the same time with nodes that are connected throughout the universe.
Is that the macabre body, rainbow body, or light body, or what are you referring to here?
I think all those traditions, the Merkaba mystics of the Hebrews, the Chakravajra of the Buddhists, the Yalus of the Vajrayana Buddhists, the rainbow body, and the Vatarata of the Rig Veda, which goes much further back, the Ati Yoga sphere of Dzogchen, are all related to the same primordial technology. That is essentially what we are. Everything else, what now presently appears 3D, is our miraculous interactive montage, which is artificial. It is our entertainment system, and the best abstracts of the super and hyper civilizations are occurring here. And they're interactive as us. And we interact with them, not just with our consciousness, as the consciousness collapses the wave function. That's the old way, that's the dream way. Also with biological coherence. So now we have the emergence of anthropic satience with biological coherence, the work of the Heart Math Institute over 25 years, where passionate love, it's really love itself is infinite, so it can just be compassion. But through compassion, one senses infinite love, and compassion kind of takes the opposites and phase cancels them. And when the heart isn't measured in compassionate love, it produces a golden sequence. And the 7 layers of heart muscle, which produce the 7 toroidal fields that are the same 7 axes as a tetrahedron, and actually produce then a magnetic tetrahedron at the heart by their toroidal angle pulses coming from the contraction and expansion of the heart. In compassion, they all align. So instead of being the 7 axes of the rainbows, where the photons have 7 spin axes according to the tetrahedron, the water tetrahedron that creates the prisma effect, you get the sun, you get this coherent light. And this is the golden proportion, and it peaks at 8 cycles per second. 8 cycles per second is extraordinarily important because it's the tuning of the universe.
And you can only reach that harmonic through compassion.
Well, we are all the time the practice, each of us. Our consciousnesses. The consciousness is untouchable. It doesn't have evolution. It is past, present, and future in satiation and beyond. But this satience, this ontological satience, becoming recognized today in humanity, becomes biologically practical when compassion is in the heart. This becomes the horse, so to speak, or the direct modem interface to the genetic code, because the Heart Math Institute now has shown over 25 years that what the state of at least 2 minutes of compassion is focused on DNA samples, and this is usually animal DNA. There's fluorescence reading before, and then it's focused upon the willed intention with compassion to have it uncoil or coil more occurs over the placebo effect by at least 40%, and even at half a mile distance instantly. And more recently, a pilot was able to produce 3 results at the same time, showing a non-local, non-Hertzian aspect to compassionate love. And all pilots who would engage to willfully change the DNA, who are not in a compassionate state, they could be in joy instead, or in this basic cappuccino talk, had no effect. They were under the placebo effect. So it means for the first time, genetic engineering is actually accessible to humanity through biofeedback. Now, I don't work for the Heart Math Institute, so I can say that from their old papers, the heart peaks at 8 cycles per second in the golden proportion. That's now, I think, a business secret inside the Heart Math Institute's application in a balance. But it's very, very important. Every cubic centimeter of the universe has hydrogen, and the hydrogen atom has its proton to the electron. The phase velocity differences between the proton and the electron is an equation of 8 cycles per second. 92% of the atoms in our body are hydrogen. The DNA double helix has an arrangement to the base pairs that is an arrangement of 8 cycles per second. There's a lot of complexity that can be gone into on that. And a greater signal of 8 hertz enables replication, enables the protons to unzip in DNA replication. That's the trigger signature as well. So it's the signature of life, but it is universal. We call this universal temporary. 8 cycles per second was shown by Dr. Andrea Kuharich already in the 50s to pass through a Faraday cage and a vacuum. It was first vacuum, and nothing is supposed to go through the copper and the vacuum. By the 70s, it was a triple vacuum. And the only way that 8 cycles can pass through a Faraday cage and a vacuum is if it ortho rotates 90 degrees and 90 degrees through something like Bell non-locality, or a state of past, present, and future. So it is both local and non-local. And since this has been replicated many, many, many times, it's also the signature of the hands of healers that affects and entrains water, and the signature remains in water for months afterward, for months. As 8 hertz passes through this triple vacuum, it 8 cycles per second has a non-local aspect, a past, present, and future aspect, and is then continuously in every cubic centimeter of the universe, 90% of the universe, 92% of our body, producing this binomial cascade: 16 hertz, 32 hertz, 64 hertz, 128 hertz, 256 hertz, 512 hertz, which is the electromagnetic spectrum absorption rate of water. Water's dielectric resonance is 8 hertz, and that's 72% of our body. So 8 hertz would appear to be constantly producing the artificial construct that we're part of. It's an interactive construct. And even our consciousness is directly related to that. Every 30 seconds, we dip to and off 8 cycles per second.
Okay. We just finished an interview with Patrick Flanagan. Are you familiar with Patrick Flanagan?
Yeah, he bought our CD. I think we got some feedback from him. And of course, very familiar. And especially as a teenager, enjoyed his pyramid energy.
Yeah. So he's living here, and we just finished an interview with him a few weeks ago, and he said something that totally blew my mind. So he's very big into water and hydrogen, and we spoke about the sun, and so the way the sun was shooting its photons to the earth, and how the photons were like in a spiral movement, and apparently some scientists, and I'm most likely completely butchering what he said, but the way the hydrogen molecules were traveling and they were clustered in a specific way actually created, according to another scientist that he spoke to, created the sacred geometric shape of a Sri yantra.
Because the wavelength of the photons was identical to the frequency of hydrogen, which is the 3 yantras.
Yeah.
I might be butchering it too, but I think
so when he said that, I had this image in my mind of being in the sun, receiving sacred geometric photonic light in 8 hertz hydrogen. I mean, I'm just I'm big on sun gazing, sun bathing, and getting out there in the sun. We're spending too much time indoors, and I just love it when I hear a scientific explanation of why that is, why I'm so attracted to it, why it is that it's calling me to such a degree.
I just came from the Azora Psytrance Festival, and there I presented another place, but there I presented the mushroom, the hydrogen perisolar region of hydrogen. So the sun releases this perisolar cascade of hydrogen atoms, which actually precess. So the protons precess 8 cycles per second and become a macro system, a macro atom. And what's interesting is that the parabole, the cap of the mushroom, where it connects to the stalk, is exactly where planet Earth is positioned. Mm-hmm. And what's also interesting, what I find interesting in my musicological work and artificial reality work, is when this is an artificial reality, the source code will be musical number harmonics. And if those musical number harmonics are axiomatic, occur in all different types of fields, you found the source code. And there won't be arbitrary connections. In fact, Dr. Sten Johansson's work, solving all number problems completely and totally, has shown that there are no more arbitrary connections. So 432 is 324, 4 to 3,200, 432,000, etc. And the interesting thing here is that 432, when you take that number, which is all over the planet, it's architectures, it's in our body, it's in the way our solar system is structured, and by spherical projection of Kepler extended. If you take 432 and divide it by half, you get 108. You divide 108 by half, you get 54. You divide that by half, you get 27. 3 Antares, 27 lines. And the moon rotates on its axis over 27 days. It is estimated that the sun's equatorial circumference, or its heart, also now rotates at not 28 days, but 27 days, latest NASA estimates, and they synchronize. They've just synchronized now over America, Oregon, etc. The moon also rotates around the Earth over 27.32 days. So you've got this 27 multiple link. Furthermore, when you take the so-called assumed elliptical orbit of the moon and the elliptical orbit of the Earth around the sun, and you take the golden mean thereof, the old Rigvedic measuring system, which said you can take the sun's heart 108 times and you'll have the distance to Earth, and you can take the heart of the moon 108 times and you have the distance to Earth, is actually fairly accurate, pretty accurate. You take the equatorial circumference of the sun, 864,000 miles, which is double 432,000 miles, and you have 108 times to Earth. You take the moon's equatorial circumference, which rotates over 27 days, and is 2,160 miles, double that, you have 4,320. It's a harmonic of 432, 108 times, and you have the distance to Earth. Now, that's actually not possible in a so-called natural universe.
No.
In the Rig Veda, no. So the Rig Veda is all about Sauma. So in the Rig Veda, you don't have Aum. But it's true that Dr. Lawrence Blair did analyze monks in the 70s, early 70s, and did find a Tibetan monk resounding on his stenographer, producing the Sri Yantra through a ah, and The you produce basically 8 conjugating spheres, like the 8-petal lotus or the universal sun foundation of the yantras. But the produce those 27 lines, produce those 9 triangles and 44 micro triangles, of which the top is the so-called bindu, which in the Rig Veda is the somanet. It's a drop of soma. So Indra quaffs soma, the soma plant, or the 108 soma plants, 108 again, headed by Soma Raja, which is botanically identified in 1764 by a professor at Oxford, to be wild rue. It's the only ancient rue that grew in the high Himalayas. Soma Raja, which contains, the equivalents of what's in Benostereops capi, harmine, harmaline, but also contains what our pineal gland produces, phenylalanine, which is 6-methoxytetrahydrobutycarboline, there's harmine and 7-methoxytetrahydrobutycarboline. And it contains leuterine, which is harmalan, which we produce with rapid ion movement.
I just want to interject here. I basically took I just took ibogaine 2 weeks ago, and so you talk about pinoline and we have melatonin and pinoline, pinoline. Pinoline, yeah, and so and you've done a lot of dark room retreats and stuff like that. So I'm very curious so my observation is that my perception of light was distorted or changed for 3, 4, 5 days after. So my retina was having a strong reaction to this iboga experience, and I'm wondering what's the connection between the retina, how we perceive light, and then these alkaloids in these plants.
In 1992, through our ultra-terrestrial guidance through Salvana, who some years later I learned was actually an author of one of 3 hymns of the Rig Veda in the 9th book on Soma. He told me to look at the somas of harmine, harmaline, and DMT as being involved in my translation experience when I was 19 in Denmark, where I disappeared into 4 people, and I went through this vortexia, counter-rotating technology, which went head over heels, and it's a whole story unto itself. Which was I was participating with it. I had to do my part, but the ultra-terrestrials were doing their part too. I call it ultra-terrestrial translation technology, for want of a better word. I did go somewhere. At the time, I thought, is it another dimension? I don't know where I went, but I went into some place where I had 4 heads, 4 arms, and we were united. And it was out in space. Maybe I'm inclined now more to go towards the genotopic plane, but it's very hard to be certain. What is certain is that 4 people went into that room, a very small room, sat down on their chairs, and at some point I decided to come back. It takes a long time to come back. And to lock into one set of hands.
Yeah.
That's the hard thing.
I know the feeling.
Yeah. Great. Yes. Wonderful. Fantastic. Wonderful. And then, the faces turn around and say, well, how did you get into this room? And say, well, I was here for hours. And no, that's not possible. So one of these ultra-terrestrials, Manu Salvana Emmanuel, who is in the Indus Valley and Sarasvati Valley culture, which is 14,000 years old, archaeologically speaking, much older than Sumeria, is called Salavahana, the water bearer, the one who brings the water and gives the water, and these are the waters of life, the alchemical waters, the soma waters. So he tells me to look at those molecules. And, so I'm researching as much as I can. This is 92, there's no internet. I'm going to secondhand bookshops in the different countries I'm in Amsterdam, a lot of secondhand bookshops. In Copenhagen, there's some secondhand bookshops. And eventually I find a paper by Dr. Bo Holmstad, who was at the Karolinska Institute in Sweden, where he was analyzing yogis and rinpoches and lamas who were meditating in caves for a minimum of 5 years. And he drew blood, had samples, assays made, and he found that they had kind of mutated from a serotonin base to a beta-carboline base, and especially the tetrahydrobeta-carbolines, not just the basic 1, 2, 3, 4 beta-carboline. So phenylaline is 6-methoxy-tetrahydrobeta-carboline. Harmine is 7-methoxy-tetrahydrobeta-carboline. We also found 10-methoxy-harmaline in these yogis, as well as norharmalan, which is loturine. It's the secret of the lotus shakes of Buddhists when they fast, which produces rapid eye movements and produces the vision plane of Buddha, the Dharmakaya Buddha, or Svabhavikakaya Buddha, the 4th state of the Buddha, in which the true Kaya are kind of ground that Buddha probably never existed. Jesus probably never existed. It was a visionary plane. And so by looking at those molecules and taking the foundation of Dr. Holmstad, and having also read some of the songs of Geshe Choksha, who about 800 AD was a kind of contactee. She met this Vajrananda, who came in a Chakrabhadra, or lotus vehicle, and Padmasambhava, who was manifested as a Vajradhara, a blue race that uses the moon as a transduction chamber.
Interesting.
And initiates her in the secrets of Anuttara Yoga Tantra, which is counter-rotation, like 8 cycles is equal phase conjugation, counter-rotation, phase cancellation, phase purifies infinitely. And then eventually the 33rd path of Buddhism, a new state of Buddhism, which is Dzogchen, everything is the practice, which includes then Ati Yoga. Ati Yoga is the utmost sphere that incorporates all opposites, and darkroom technology. So, and the 108 plants. So the 108 plants I ignored when I was a teenager, because I had to go first through 7 years of my own experiences, having no influence whatsoever. I didn't even drink coffee. I drank maybe beer or wine once a year. It's important to be able to be on the fence on both sides, I believe. I think the anthropogenic experience is extremely valid. But I remember very well her darkroom retreats. So I put 2 and 2 together and developed a neurotransmitter model for tryptophan, converting through various enzymes, needing various vitamins and minerals to convert into penoline, or actually harmine, because the work on penoline became available through the internet. So I wasn't given that by the Soldani. It was harmine and harmaline, and that's what I researched. Learned about penoline in 1995. And as a result of the first melatonin saturation, 3 days of deep sleeping, you wake up, you have a serotonin cycle. It's about 2 hours. It's enough to eat and be able to go to the toilet, and then boom, back down to melatonin. After 3 days, there's enough beta-carbolines, tetrahydrobeta-carbolines like penoline, tryptoline. There's some evidence for harmine, 7-methoxytetrahydrobeta-carboline also being secreted by the pineal gland, but not in equal quantities to penoline, which it's equal quantities to melatonin generally in the measurements, like Dr. Jason Holloway's measurements and many others. And then on the fourth day, that there would be tryptamine that would become active. I first thought, in my first model in 1992, that it would be DMT. But DMT is only active at 25 milligrams. As a result of experience in bringing hundreds of pilots through, I did my first doctorate when I was 22 in 1992 above Lake Geneva. And by within 1 year, I brought already quite a few pilots through and brought hundreds through in the meantime. Generally, what happens is that on the fourth day, you start to get enough saturation of beta-carbolines to inhibit the selective monoamine oxidase enzyme and 5-MeO-DMT, which is active already at 3 to 5 milligrams, slowly comes into activation. We switch off the serotonin melatonin cycle loop using, at the time we were using Amazonian guarana. Now guarana has been irradiated for export, so it doesn't work the same way anymore. So we have other forms of adrenal endopamine activating plant sources. To switch off the serotonin melatonin cycle and to activate the interior of the pineal gland, where then 5-MeO-DMT starts to become more regular. On the fifth day, you start to get a kind of moonlight, and that you look into that moonlight, and then your imagination projects into that. You have your eyes open. And 5-MeO-DMT, as it builds up over the next days, also gives one a spatial element. So as you're walking in your imagination, and the pineal gland is an atrophied eye, but it is sensitive to microwave radiation, to biophotons, like what is emitted by the DNA, infrared and ultraviolet. So DNA TV is potentially accessible through the pineal gland because it does have a route directly to the visual cortex. And sound also is registered by the pineal gland. So one experiences in the darkroom. We do things like darkroom dancing. We do things like musical chairs, but in a darkroom level. As the imagination gets stronger and stronger, and you use your hallucinations to orientate around the large house. Or we once did it in a castle in Switzerland, and everyone has a room. There is a meeting room, and we try to have no reference to time, so people go into different kind of time experiences as well, which is interesting. Then on the 8th day, a certain percentage of pilots would start to experience DMT. And this would be engaged by what I call laughing gas exercise. It's something I learned at school.
Sign me up. I'll join your next one.
Yeah, we have to take this technology quite far. I think I believe it's going to be. I believe it's actually a human hadronic superconducting technology for intermediate controlled nuclear fusion, as it was discovered by Dr. Roger Santilli. That's body temperature nuclear fusion, not cold fusion or hot fusion. Body temperature with just 70 volts of electricity and 100 psi, which is skin surface tension, which then has created fusion of water and produced other elements, which have been academically empirically reviewed.
Could you clarify, Ananda, which technology you're talking about right now? You're talking about dark rooms or something specific that you're developing?
Well, I'm talking about hadronic intermediate controlled nuclear fusion, which is done in a hadronic reactor. But the ideal hadronic reactor is actually the human body, because the superior iso superconductor, which is now given after Dr. Alexander Animalu, as Dr. Roger Santilli, is extremely taboo to the church of science, not industrial science, corporate science, but the church of science. Those who are holding on desperately to the speed of light dogma of Einstein. They are having a hard time. They are having an ego death at the moment. So
thanks to people like you and a lot of other scientists who are discovering what's really going on.
Well, we're a semantic artist, so we're bringing it down to a little bit more cultural poetry that can be integrated, and it's entertainment, and it brings references or suggestions, maybe, of solutions that have been discovered in these fields. So the laughing gas experiment is something we all did at school. It's a breathing exercise. You get up, you usually fall unconscious, but not in the dark room. In the dark room, phenylalanine or the beta carbolines come in and protect the brain and enable nitrous oxide to come in. You get a nitrous oxide laughing gas.
Interesting.
And that brings in the DMT. So then you get the checkerboard, you pass through the checkerboard, and you pass into the low-dose DMT altered reality. And then when you pass back through the checkerboard, elements of that will start to overlay on the imagination that you see, and for some people, very strong. On the 11th day, something else starts to happen, something that's more cyclohexanone-based, and this starts to produce alternity. This is a whole story into itself. We can speak for hours just on this aspect.
Okay, so you're not doing darkroom retreats anymore, and you're not. I guess you're not conducting any entheogen processes as well.
We will, in fact, be doing a darkroom next year. We're looking for a kind of cave hotel somewhere, maybe in the Alps or in Italy. Yeah. There are certain laws that are problematic, like there needs to be lights on by hotel laws to show where the fire exit is. So it has to be, we have to work out way around that. It's also kind of illegal for there to be an assembly in closed spaces of more than 10 people. That's another problem we're trying to work out around. My partner's a lawyer.
Otherwise, come down here to Ecuador. We can do something down here.
An underground hotel would be superb.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll find one.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yes, I'm coming. I'm going to be in Sao Paulo anyway in early October.
Okay.
So at least on the same continent.
Yeah. Yeah.
The 8 Hertz principle is interesting in that phenylalanine has a nuclear magnetic resonance of 8 cycles per second. So I did went through the charts of nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy, where the independent atoms are given exactly their Hertzian frequencies. And so the construct of phenylalanine and harmine is pretty much in the middle of 8 cycles. There are components that are 7 hertz, there are components that are 10 hertz. Iboga is 10 hertz. Iboga really has the same tryptamine core with a bit of 5-MeO DMT on the side, but works with the cerebellum pulse instead of the corpus callosum synchronization pulse and the 8 hertz synchronization of the whole DNA. And the dielectric resonance of water, of course.
Yeah. So, what's your thoughts on microdosing on Syrian rue, like on a daily basis for 1-2 months or whatever? What's your thoughts?
I did just do now another somanetics, which I didn't do for years. I did that a lot in the 90s. That was with shamanic doses. We worked for years in alchemical labs, and then 10 days at a time, purifying wild rue, Sona Raja of the Rig Veda, Hauma of Zoroaster, and Nebu, the plant of the Horus in the Egyptian mysteries, or hierobotanicals, as were chronicalized by Dioscorides, who was sent by the Greeks for most of his life to study amidst the hierophants of Egypt their hierobotanical knowledge, and he described that down. So Nebu, the plant of the baby Horus that grows a golden apple, which is holding the rue seeds, is directly related to the fifth element, Horus, and the left eye of Horus. course, and everything related to that. By extracting Ru and using chemical filters, purifying, after about 3 days with chemical filters, you'll notice first you get the tawny golden liquid that starts to become ruby red or Persian red. It's the dye of the red Persian carpets, which is why they're called carpets. We've been saying that since the 90s. Then you start to get this green stuff emerging, which doesn't pass through the chemical filters. And this is quinolines and many other kinds of molecules. So purifying that for 10 days until you've got a really good tincture and storing that in alcohol and then taking in a small bottle and taking like 5 drops of that before going to bed. Although we would combine it into mother elixirs, so we would extract from DMT plant sources. We also made orbitally rearranged monatomic elements from Dead Sea salt. Himalayan salt wasn't so good for yield, and deep sea salt. So we got the platinum group elements, purified them in an orbitally rearranged monatomic state or in a Cooper pair superconductivity state, which is now being exactly described by Dr. Roger Santilli. Cooper pairing, superconductivity. Quantum mechanics can't deal with that. It tries to. And so that would be added when everything is cold, because otherwise it just levitates off. And so the one of the mother elixirs would have 5-MeO-DMT purified over 10 days, and the root purified together with the orma shaken in a 40% alcohol, like vodka or something. And of course, it would have involved also sound alchemy, observational alchemy, and also the practice of the whole body 8 hertz vehicle, that is engaging the 8 hertz of the heart, engaging the 8 hertz of the plexus coccygeal, like when you contract the plexus coccygeal, which includes the scrotum, the prostrate, the uterus. The EEG shows 8 cycles per second. And when the eyes go up and in, 8 cycles per second synchronization happens. We utilize a 3-in-1 system, so 8 hertz. As an amplification system, 8 hertz times 8 hertz times 8 hertz, the dielectric resonance of water 3 times, produces its electromagnetic absorption frequency, 512 hertz. It also has 512 dimensions that resolves all number problems as an axiom, which is interesting. In a musical keyboard, that is 512 hertz as it's laid out. Dr. Stein Johansson also studied our 8-fold system, where all 8 poles of the body are unified at 8 cycles per second, which was originally observed in Einstein imaging technique by Dr. Reinhardt, who took Einstein's formula because Einstein didn't believe that radio astronomy would be successful. It's only a 100-year window, logically, that a super civilization or evolving civilization would utilize radio astronomy. It's very primitive and quaint. After several hundred years of civilization and thousands of years, that we would go down to consciousness. So he used that as his assumption and assumed there's this super civilizations or extraterrestrial civilizations out there. And imagine that. He had to imagine that with tasting, smelling, hearing, seeing, and feeling. And he would hold 2 stones. So Einstein would hold zwei Stein. Einstein would hold 2 stones. And the reason for holding the 2 stones would be that if he fell asleep, he would wake up. What Dr. Reinhardt did is that he added to that speech. And he took 30 mentally handicapped patients, 17 of whom could learn this technique. The others could not. And those who did were told to get from the ultra-terrestrials or ETs, which they had the 5 sensorial fusion experience with, scientific patents. And they would speak this. And the brain would be measured as they would speak this. And all 8 poles of the brain were synchronized at 8 cycles per second alpha, especially through the act of speaking. The 17 patents were given to the US Patent Office. All patents passed as workable technologies, and the judges who sit on the patents office are physicists. So that was quite pertinent. It shows that 8 hertz is our living hyper technology, and we can use it on a macro scale. So we utilize that also with inner heating together with outer heating and observation, the phase conjugation in the body with observation, so that the wave-particle duality interactivity is engaged. What we've noticed, for instance, in the darkroom, some of the pilots, is that when you go out in the night, about 3 a.m., and you get some kind of photonic source, you see it pixelating. It's first very, very aggressive, and you see it coming in and pixelating and starting to formulate and starting to hallucinate and engage a kind of seductive gameplay with. It would seem. So it would seem. And in the darkroom, you don't have this wave particle duality where the observer collapses the wave function, where actually the wave is in a sea of waves, as has been seen in the random number experiments. And the HeartMath Institute on the Heart Cloud used coherent, compassionate brain states to focus on the random number generators all over the planet and produce absolutely clear outcome that was coherent and that was non-random, beyond the experiments of John and co, where the observer focusing will produce already an outcome on random numbers. That's just the observer collapsing the wave function. In the dark, you don't have that observer collapsing the wave function, so you're starting to go in the sea of waves, and you look at a cup, and when you look at that cup, it's a real thing. It may be a bit infrared, a bit bigger than what it actually is when you touch it. But as you keep looking, you see every cup you've ever seen there. So the nervous system is becoming aware of itself and how it's actually hallucinating or producing a holographic sensorial somatic construct of a so-called objective form, which is already been a collapse of the wave to a point particle value by the act of observation. So the interaction of the observer that's collapsing the wave function to point particle is 8 cycles per second. Dr. David Bohm was going into that quite strongly with his post-quantum mechanics, but unfortunately he died when Dr. Ruggiero Santilli came forwards with isotopic mathematics, and by 1998 had made iso electrons, literally cancelling the Heisenberg uncertainty principle into 2 electrons that twin and that begin to fuse through the nucleus. And this is called iso-superconductivity today, and there's no valence bonding whatsoever. These stack up into millions of isoelectrons, which are called magnetons, and this produces things like magna gas. So you can take manure, waste oil, radioactive waste, put it through the plasma arc flow, which is a lightning simulator, and you produce this magna gas, which you put into a gas injectable system that the Ferrari of Dr. Santilli had the gas system, and many, many units have been injected with magna gas, standard gas injection systems. You can apply this to alternative energy and conventional energy. By hadronic mechanics, I predicted years ago that oil and gas would suddenly reappear on planet Earth because nature is invariant according to hadronic biology. It is the first science that describes invariant systems, which life is. Invariantly, all other scientific branches had variables, always variables, and never dealt with both problems, which have to be dealt with to have true objectivity, the outer problem and the inner problem of physics. The inner problem isn't dealt with in any of the other branches. Hadronic mechanics deals with both, and therefore lightning could be described exactly and reproduced like an orgasmatron. Through this, the 5th nuclear energy was found at the unifying force, which is attractive and overcomes the 4 nuclear forces, and in its attractive form produces this intermediate control nuclear fusion for the isoelectron set, which is extremely significant. Also, we didn't have the mathematics to be able to really look into our body or how our body must be, what kind of microscopes. We just got a skeleton version of our body through the scanning electron microscope. It basically is photographing the dead potentials rather than the animated form. So hadronic genetics, which is called hypergenetics, it's a corporate science. I've gleaned little pieces, bits and pieces from my colleagues. It's unfortunately a corporate secret. Fortunately, perhaps too, it's being developed, and there's hadronic medicine, there's macromolecules that are being made, which is exactly what alchemy is describing. It's not just that it is quinoline or harmine and DMT and 5-MeO-DMT, as you have in Charlie Ponga or Chocolate Ponga. But it is a macromolecular resonance that has become one that is being described, and that's being described in the Soma rites of Srika Turuki, the final Soma panacea. I went to Kalibangan in 2005, which is along the Sarasvati Valley River site, which itself was mythical until NASA remote imaging found that, in fact, in remote imaging, there was a fluous river there 4,900 years ago. And it was fluous as described in the Rig Veda about 8,000 to 9,000 years ago. In the meantime, after that, the Sarasvati River Valley sites like Lotal, Kalibangan, Niyakara in Pakistan have been dug down, and they're going down to 14,000 before present. And it's more civilized at the roots so far. They have high metallurgic technologies. You've got gold, silver, copper, and electrum. It's the root source of electrum. At Lotal, they found over 200 batteries, which were linked together, 5 volts of electricity, similar to the Baghdad battery. Lemon juice. You've got the athanors, by which electrum would be made with the electricity generated by the batteries. Soma Raja would be added with purified metals. The byproduct of electrum is forma. So the smelting together of gold and silver is what the production of electrum comes from, and meteoric ore very often. This was then transported later through the Indus Valley and Harappan culture to Sumeria and Egypt. And the Sindhu tree, the acacia tree, became Sindh tree, or the acacia tree of Egypt, which is where all the gods are born from, and from which Asna, the mother of the gods, who's later called Hathor, House of Horus, extends her breast. And it's acacia medane, which contains 5-MeO-DMT and DMT, and some beta-carbolines. It's also the very first church that was made by James the Just, Joseph of Arimathea in Glastonbury, was called the Wattle Church. That's the Acacia Medane Church. So that is the root of Christianity. But it's the root of alchemy too. In the Sarasvati River Valley culture, they had 70% alcohol. That's very strong percentage alcohol. The Greeks said they had strong drinks, but that was only 14%. Of course, there are other elements inside. Soma was always one with that technology. So alcohol was later separated through the Hindu system that was introduced thousands and thousands of years later as a militaristic system that divided the mysteries and introduced reincarnation not in one lifetime, where usually the Soma rite would be done 4 times a year. You would die and be born again, and the Atmanu, the super self, would bring you into one of these 4 facets, and you'd be born again into, let's say, a Brahmin or a worker caste for that quarter. And you would transmigrate through the 88 houses of the zodiac, which are intact in the Sarasvati River Valley sites. That's the root source of them. So is the idea of the one body of Christ, or the anthropos, Christ, the anthropos, now translated son of man, but the word is anthropos. The root of this mystery of anthropos through many branches was thought to go to the Persian Zoroastrian mysteries and Homer, etc., where Zoroaster drinks Haoma, and Haoma is clearly wild brew, but ephedra is a co-element, and the roots of pomegranate contain the DMT.
Interesting.
The roots of the pomegranate are given as the symbolic Haoma to the novices, while the priests receive wild brew today as their sacrament. So the outer and the inner mysteries have to be brought together. And they've been diversified. And this is what happened through Hinduism. So it made the castes separated, and it separated the mystery of Soma. So the Brahmin had to drink from the very Soma plants. There's the Somya plants, which are the 107 admixture plants, which later included the genetic branch off of wild brew, which is Ruta graveolens, which is called Soma luta. It didn't exist in the Vedic times. So they would have to drink that Soma and steal it from the other castes, whilst the lower caste was allowed to have alcohol. And the intermediary caste used kusha grasses, which is Phalaris arundinacea, which are the grasses of the gods in the Rig Veda, to clean the graha vessel, the grail vessel called graha, in which the Soma is drunk by the Brahmin. In fact, you have to put all of these together, and you have the original Soma formula, and that was discovered in the archaeological sites of the Sarasvati River Valley culture. using extraordinary alchemy. I did the experiment with vodka, a big beer mug full of vodka, wild brew, 5-MeO-DMT, and orma. Quaffed it in one go. And first you feel the alcohol attacking the hypothalamus as usual.
Yeah.
Then the beta carbolines like harmine and phenylalanine come in and protect, and you get very clear. Brings in the 5-MeO-DMT, and you get the Shamba pillar, this pillar where you go to immaculate emptiness and infinite oneness coexistent at the same time. And into the somanet, as it's described in the Rig Veda. The Rig Veda describes the somanet as when Indra keeps drinking soma, so he gets macroscopia. He becomes so massive that he sees the two world halves, that's planet Earth, as a sphere, as described in the Rig Veda. And then looks out into the universe and sees these drops of soma, which are called Sindhu or Sindhus, which reflects every part of the universe on its surface in its entirety. So this network of soma drops, this soma net, is a first description of a hyperholography. It's more than just a hologram. It's hyperholographic since every drop reflects every part of the universe in its entirety. Later, that's called the Indra net in the Vedic sources, not the Proto-Vedic sources. So soma, which is also described to be a plant that is 4,320,000,000 years for its branches branching out, which is the kalpa or kalapa, is also then a time machine. Of course, 8 hertz is local and non-local, and is in every cubic centimeter of the universe. The Rig Veda describes the plant of soma, the plants of soma. It describes the inner plants of soma, and of course the soma of the pineal gland, so that the molecule pinoline in the pineal gland and the molecule pinoline in the Somaraja plant tallies. They have a nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy of 8 cycles per second. It describes 8 mushrooms as somyas, soma additives. And it describes the sun mushroom, so as one form of soma. And that solar mushroom is a proton procession of 8 hertz, and it's harmonic binomial frequencies that engages in part or is transduced through the Schumann resonance, which is different to, it's just slightly off, and sometimes is on, to the hydrogen universal tempering resonance of 8 cycles per second. The Sri Yantra, in regards to the hadrons, was kind of done in Jordoon algebra in 27 dimensions. We covered that in the O1 hadron material book that's on our website. We did that in, I think, 2005, 2006, and it's a Russian scientist who did the Jordoon algebra. Jordoon has to just be isolifted with scintillary physics, and it's accurate. So this 8 hertz resonance, this soma net, and the Sri Yantra description of the photons by Dr. Flanagan is exactly on, because the universal soma plant, the universal Sri Yantra, is 8 cycles per second, which is the precession frequency of the protons processing in the peri-solar region mushroom of our from the sun into our solar system and the heliosphere. Likewise, there is a galactic plant described coming from the galactic center and going through hydrogen resonance volleys, which we've gone into detail with, as well as a universal soma net. So the whole universe is upheld as a Sri Yantra by the 90% hydrogen atoms that are precessing and 8 cycles per second. That's called the Sauma Kalapa in the Rig Veda, and that's the soma net. And it's this universal fractal or hyperfractal Sri Yantra that has all these nodes of the soma net. I think that soma net is the artificial technology.
Okay. So when you spoke about the Indus Valley and a long time ago, with all these ancient technologies we had back then, what came to my mind is like, so what happened? Why have we forgotten all this? What happened? I mean, we obviously, as Graham Hancock, he talks about it like a species of amnesia. So what do you think happened here?
We've pulled it off. Almost pulled it off. The utmost miracle. We are this anthropos, this super and hyper civilization. The logistics of this, but we believe in 3D. But the logistics of this is, if you take the observations of astronomy, it seems that 12 billion years ago there were stars there. We've seen the light at the speed of light coming towards us. Take that standard interpretation. The anthropic principle, which has not been denied ontologically, at least. I mean, Aristotle's ontology, the science of being, has not been able to be separated from any experiment whatsoever. Being is always observing and then describing and defining, and then as it defines itself, it becomes qualities like hot and cold and various elements. But ontological being is first. The anthropic principle, whether the subanthropic principle, the weak or strong anthropic principle, it's an observer-orientated universe. So there must have been someone 12 billion years ago who was observing the universe. And if that was the so-called genesis of the universe, if you could believe in the Big Bang theory, which can never be proven, then you have to think, well, then someone must have time traveled much earlier on to get to from the future into the past. And of course, this is what physicists like Jack Sarfati like. They like future causality, where the future is generating the past. We subscribe or extract from Rogero Santilli hadronic physics, hyper-evolution or hypervolution, which is where past, present, and future are constantly being summed, have already been summed, and are being interacted with by the anthropic sapiens, the ontological being, which is already in the summation point, but is now having this interactive entertainment system. So we've kind of pulled off the miracle of being in this state. This super civilization, first off, would develop space machines and time machines. At the same time, they would begin to simulate atoms and molecules. We already have simulated almost a molecule, and would go from nanotechnology to picotechnology, and maybe bypass picotechnology directly to femtotechnology. Some of my colleagues have gone very specifically there. Femtotechnology is the hydrogen atom. Which is where we want to go. We want to go to this foundation 8 hertz Sri-Yantric plane, which is local and non-local, has no barriers and sets up all these harmonic musical frequencies above and below it, and phase cancels discoherency and produce phase coherency, which is awareness. So the 10% that is not hydrogen enables this other set of realities to appear apparently so. In the idea of the anthropos, which you can find back in the Purusa Sukta of the Rig Veda, and that's book 10, hymn 90, only appearing one time. It's 32 lines, it's 32 branches. The Purusa itself is 33. And the way it describes anthropos is that each person is the 33rd degree, each person is the pure anthropos first. Everything else is vipa, it's conjugative mirrors. The Western systems have taken that the wrong way up. So they've taken this as, like Freemasons and other societies, Rosicrucians, etc. They will take first degree to 33rd degree, maybe, and the 32 degrees in the black or the white, depending how they go, will be just reflections of the 33rd degree, which is supposed to represent humanity and the oversoul of humanity, and eventually leading to Adam Kadmon, as it is now in the Western traditions. Adam Kadmon comes from Ati Manu, which is also root of our atom and Adam. And Manu itself has Anu in it, and it is the Anus that are the smallest point particles that are described in the later Vedantic literature quite detailed. The Vedantics went problematic. They kind of went into an impersonal absolute. But the Paramanus and the Anus are described as atoms, and their descriptions sound like iso electrons and even hypermagnicals in some of those descriptions of Sankara and Samkhya. Going back to the sage Kasyapa, who is also described as one of the ultra-terrestrial authors, or numinous authors of the Rig Veda. The Rig Veda is having numinous authorship according to the Anu Pramanis, or appendixes, that gives the exact authors of each hymn. So that is a numinous source. And I've also had my own personal experiences first as a teenager. The Shruti, the beheld mind treasures, these living spheres of information, living images that were alive with infinite images, as the ultra-terrestrial intelligence would come over the body, would fuse my five senses into one hypersense, very much like high-dose 5-MeO-DMT. I actually did 54 milligrams of pure 5-MeO-DMT. We thought it was DMT. That's what we were told by the guy who supplied it, but it was actually 5-MeO-DMT. So we were dosing according to DMT, and that brought me into a state that I found extraordinarily similar to when Salvana would, when I was 16, unify my five senses and go into the sphere of emptiness and oneness at the same time, which is the essence of the being molecule, as it's being called, 5-methoxy-DMT. I don't believe anything can be put into a molecule, but a molecule will represent a certain state. So the experience, the beheld mind treasure, the Shruti, came first. Then I went into the scientific research, development of darkrooms, developing of the music. Before the music, I had semantic art, cosmology of the God 432 computer, 93, 94, where I was taking number 432 and its relatives from all different fields, partly inspired on the work of Dr. Carl Monk, the Code, very important work from the 80s that has inspired many people, and is another factor that would indicate this is an artificial reality. As the temple complexes over thousands of years, whether it's Angkor Wat, 72 degrees from the Great Pyramid, where the Great Pyramid is the Greenwich Zero, or if you go to the Pyramid of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza and unify its steps and its sides, you get the minutes of arc distance to the Great Pyramid, same with the Tikal, Stonehenge, Easter Island, all of these different temple complexes over thousands of years have the zero meridian of the Gizeh Pyramid. Now, if you put all tectonic plates together in a kind of Pangaea, the Great Pyramid is in the middle, and you take the capstone of the Great Pyramid. Theoretically, it is 1/56th of the Great Pyramid, and the Great Pyramid is 1/56th of the Gizeh Plateau, which is 1/56th of the Nile Delta, which is 1/56th of the Nile, and the Nile is 1/56th of Africa, and Africa is 1/56th of planet Earth. Which is just impossible. And you multiply the base of the Great Pyramid 43,200 times, and you get the polar circumference and these kind of things. So that you have this readout of temples over thousands of years to the Great Pyramid, and the Great Pyramid was white. It was made of calcium carbonate, and calcium carbonate is bone. It's pyramidal. So it's the geometry of our bones, and it's pyramidal. It's octahedral. So it's literally the bone foundation of the reality readout. One could take then these temples over thousands of years as a living computer readout. In this artificial reality construct made by an all-one artificer, of which we are co-artificers interactively through the somanet and our own anthropic stations, and now genetically applicable through biological coherence. In that dawning of biological coherence being objectively now demonstratable through HeartMath's inner balance or other biofeedback technologies, where compassion is seen and the coherence curve, maintained coherence, goes up rapidly, and you find how the observer is interacting with it and saying, oh, no, that's not possible. I can't produce that kind of coherence. Only enlightened people can. We don't subscribe to enlightenment. That enlightenment is an illusion, but it's a useful one, perhaps, for some. So the dawning of who we actually are, super civilization that has time travel, because if you space travel across the galaxy, you need a time travel. There's no other way to use the resources. The hadronic space-time machines were patented in 1994 by Dr. Priscilla, who in the biological sciences proved the conch shell morphology in isotopic and genotopic, that's geno-holographic actuality. In the biological sciences, that's quite empirical. A few years later, they made patents for the first hadronic space-time machines, and they are not space machines, they're space-time machines that use isotopic and genotopic and hyperlocomotion. It's the hypertopic plane, it's a macro-reversible plane, geometrical motions and movements that enables one to go beyond the paradox. These are very detailed systems, including Stargate systems. Eventually, those will emerge, but only hadronic materials can step into hadronic space-time machines. It appears now that portions of biology are actually hadronic. We're not what we thought we were.
Yeah.
For instance, as I said at the beginning, the 512 dimensions needed just for all the mathematical equations that occur within an animated second of our body. You need a minimum of 512 dimensions, as demonstrated by Dr. Sten Johansson. And the discovery of hypermagneticals, which are hypercomplex, more complex than magneticals, which are millions of clusters of these isoelectrons in isosuperconductivity, where superconductivity can occur at body temperature and very high temperatures, stars and Jupiter, etc. Hadronic astronomy. The ISO unit was then applied to telescopes by making a concave lens, so that you would have the ISO mirror symmetry, because antimatter light is traveling the opposite way to light, because when matter and antimatter comes together, there's usually a destruction. The concave lens or scintillating ISO telescope is placed side by side a convex lens Galileo telescope, and then they've been for years now looking into the universe and discovering antimatter cosmic rays, antimatter gamma rays, antimatter asteroids, and a wide variety of antimatter astronomical phenomena. But the surprise came about a year and a half ago, when the telescope was aimed on planet Earth, because suddenly spheres of antimatter material, several different types of material, as apparently technological, because they were moving with intelligence, were also being recorded. Scientists are recording this all over the planet. One type is antimatter that is not being affected by the matter that's here. So that itself is a very advanced technology.
So is it a sphere?
Both antimatter and matter at the same time.
In the same space?
In the same space.
Interesting.
And then moving with intelligence. And of course, the Galileo telescope generally doesn't see anything. Sometimes something might just come in briefly. So this is good news also for things like dialoguing with the super civilizations, whenever we are in the age of dialogue. But there is also early warning systems that have become very sophisticated. The early warning systems are problematic for small individual contactees today. Not so much anymore group gatherings because of the free will equation and anthropic satience and the way that backfires. And that's a whole topic we can go into great detail. And we have a lot of experience in that. I'm moving from Norway. That's another story. So the super civilizations developed space travel, time travel, antimatter and matter combinations. Will have developed simulation. So we'll have simulated their world rapidly, maybe 500 years to 1,000 years. Then we'll have simulated, in the simulations, we'll have worlds where 22% are computer programmers simulating their simulated planets, and that will have an exponential curve that will be combined then with all possible genetic permutations. So you have all gene modifications possible, all stem cell technologies possible, until those have been fused together, and they are space and time traveling. And as a result of all of those technologies, simulations producing whole new universes of simulations in a phase conjugated network like the SOMAnet, you can then start to conjugate from a past, present, and future state, which is the basic time of these civilizations. You can start to produce the sun and the moon as modulators with a technological background of a solar system that can produce wave interference patterns, kind of hyperhologram, on which the past, present, and future scenario abstracts are permeated, and into which one projects oneself and participates and has the best abstracts and has interactivity. It seems completely real. It's VR. It's a kind of hypertopic virtual reality. We are all one being. We're actually that super civilization that realized there is this anthropization foundation, or the anthropos, which is behind the anthropic sessions of every individual. The anthropos in the Parousia Sutta is described to be the summation of all past, present, and future personal and non-personal moments. The hadronic horizon of hyperdense media discovered by Dr. Rogero Santilli and continued to be discovered or worked with in exact fields of science, including hadronic chemistry, where the 7 hadrons overlap in infinite recursion in the heart of every single atom, past, present, and future, both locally and having local and non-local aspects. The null reduction, or the value reduction of its point particle is actually null, and you can't use the Riemann metric unit for that Einstein used, which is a 16-number game board grid, but which reduces down to 10, which is used in symmetry, unifying physics, like superstring physics, which has produced nothing practical whatsoever in all of these years. Just some interesting ideas with some complexity. The Minkowskian space-time meter is what Dr. Rogero Santilli used. It also has 16 digits, but it doesn't reduce down to 10, and is isolifted. Now, the ISO unit, one aspect of the ISO unit is if you take 1, 2 is just 2 ones, 3 is just 3 ones. So the ISO unit is 1 1 to every other 1. This produces a mirror symmetry, which has got a kind of a triangle symbol on top of the eye or any unit that is being isolifted. Quarks are isoquarks. They don't exist in 3D. In 2006, Rogero Santilli was able to identify for short periods of time the first subatomic particle, the Ethereino, which could not be reduced to 3 dimensions. The Ethereino is behind all of the 7 hadrons and all the subatomic particles, a family or zoo, that are produced by them, and which live for a part of a second, which I think is 23 decimals behind the 0 of a second. So even with high dose DMT, unimaginable in the time dilation. Even if you take a combination of time dilators, vitamin DMT, getting another cyclohexanones, you're not going to even get to a particle second. But we get an intimation, an idea of a particle second, just to kind of give a poetic grasp of the illusionary nature of what we think is a very real reality. So the anthropos is this summation, past, present, and future of every personal moment and impersonal moment. Femto technology, which I'm very heartened by, because in 1999 I was worried about that nanotechnology and wrote something about speculation about nanotechnological takeover of nature, the galaxy, and so forth. Femtotechnology is a self-assembly system where the hadronic horizon, which appears nuclear deformed to 3-dimensionality because it's hypertopically dimensional, multi-valued hyperdimensional. If you take point care symmetry, you have 11 dimensions. If I put that into the ISO unit, you have 11 dimensions mirroring another 11 dimensions, and the complete ISO unit is another mirror of those. So it's 44 dimensions minimum for the point care symmetry. Then you can make that genotopic. So that means those 4 triangles you make fractal holographic. That's the genotopic or holographic plane that Hillard used in formulating 100,000 functional morphologies, which are primitive life forms. The hypertopic plane is what is occurring in human beings, and this is the macro irreversible plane that has been identified. The Ethereino was discovered in the production of the neutron by the intermediate controlled nuclear fusion of the proton, hadron, and the electron in hydrogen. The neutron actually doesn't fully exist. It is a electron sphere coming out of a proton hadron sphere and being caught somewhere in between, producing the scattering radiation that's called neutron radiation, critical mass radiation. Our living DNA is inside those parameters. So all of the various radiations affect the uncoiled DNA, and furthermore, our subscription to peripheral somatic states or social dynamics that we think are valid and are identifying us, when in fact they are just abstracts of momentarily formations and of course, social spin dynamics. And this is presently this lodging, so this bewilderment, this spell casting that has produced this illusion required an ultimate conspiracy, and we believe this is an ultimate conspiracy. And each of the various secret societies who had the mystery remnants of the super civilization were given different facets with some disinformation and would socially spin according to those mystery objects of the ages, like the Eleusinian mysteries were also having the Kikion, which is still a mystery, and the mystery objects of the ages would be beheld.
So from my understanding, artificial intelligence, so all this sacred geometry, all these perfect numbers and dimensions and measurements and all that stuff, it's all like one big AI software construct. So basically, please give me something. Where is the organic? Where's the organic, living, real, organic consciousness? I mean, because yes, okay. I mean,
the sacred, the platonic solids, etc., don't work in animating life. So in simulating primitive life, they don't work. They crumble and fall apart. So sacred geometry applies, as we know, at the platonic solids or the Vedic solids, because I saw them at Kalibangan, 8,000 years old. These solids apply to the crystalline surface. However, the water is a tetrahedron, when seen from the hydrogen bonds. Tetrahedron is probably the only form that really relays to our sense of dimensionality. It's the only platonic solid where the middle has equality to its vertices. And it is water. It's the water tetrahedron, dielectric resonance of 8 cycles per second. It produces also scattering. Our heart and the heartbeat produces a magnetic toroidal series of intercalating toroidal fields in the form of a tetrahedron, except in compassion, where it becomes a golden laser, which also produces 8 hertz, which then produces the binomial cascade. So alpha 8 hertz, 4 hertz of theta, 2 to 0 hertz of delta, 1632 hertz of beta, and then the gamma hertz 64, etc. So it produces that whole binomial cascade. At 512 hertz, the electrolysis of water by Dr. Andrea Puharich, he would excite the hydrogen atoms like orgasm or an ecstatic maintained state, electrolysis, which today would be describing the 5th hadronic force, the unifying nuclear force. So when he would excite the water tetrahedron at 8 cycles per second, over 72 hours, 512 hertz would begin to appear. And as 512 hertz manifested as a signature, a whole sideband of harmonic frequencies emerged from a ceiling of 720 hertz, which is, of course, also the number of angles in a tetrahedron, and 360 hertz at the base, and 16 hertz increments of musical resonances. That includes 432 cycles per second, the old French or scientific pitch tuning, which was then kind of changed. And that's a whole story unto itself. So, and we're changing again. The 512 hertz resonance produced then bioluminescence, biophotons, infrared, and amino acids started to appear in the sterile water, which became up over 72 hours complex protein fractal forms that were made out of literally the source of life just by simply 8 hertz water and excitation. This was replicated many times. I got in 1989 the complete stack of his papers of research, and it's over a decade of research, and you see these beautiful pictures of these fractal proteins. Now, what's interesting is that Dr. Luc Montagnier, he teleported bacterial DNA using 7 hertz. You've probably seen that teleporting DNA scientific articles a few years ago. Dr. Luc Montagnier, who was the AIDS, HIV expert, etc. So he put the bacterial DNA in a water vault and had another sterile water vault and surrounded it by a 7 hertz field and the bacterial DNA teleported into the sterile water. With the HeartMath Institute work, where the heart at the moment of compassionate love peaks at 8 cycles per second and then produces the golden cascade and the binomial cascade, the Sierpinski-Pascal triangle cascade, also called Meru Prastara in the Sarasvati Valley cultures, Agni Hota, pyramid altar topologies. The work of the HeartMath Institute that shows it's 8 hertz became of prime interest to him because he teleported DNA. So I'm still waiting. I've talked about this more than a year ago, that these experiments were ongoing. He's working with the HeartMath scientists where they're trying with consciousness, intent, compassion to teleport stem cell DNA into the DNA culture. Because when you have that, you have consciousness not only for the first time being a genetic engineer through maintained coherence, but also being able to regenerate the body at the stem cell level, which would be the next revolution. The first revolution is that we're no longer genetic robots. We have been in history. Yeah. We now have biofeedback to show that when we have the maintained coherence, which is compassionate love in the heart and the heartbeat, that we willfully change the DNA, and the way that the DNA is changed is in a non-linear, non-Hertzian manner with 3 results: uncoiling, coiling, a change in the middle with the pilots in recent years, and half a mile away. So suddenly we're becoming genetic engineers from the source of the ontological consciousness, but only with the technology of 8 hertz compassion at the heart. So we're kind of unraveling or unburying the treasure of who we actually are. And this is the most exciting part of this whole conspiracy. The conspiracy must put a lie on different places and different levels. So lies are lying on all levels of information, whether it's history, nutrition, drugs, religion, astronomy, etc. All of those will have lies lying on different places at different levels. And the lies will also be changed according to the reigns of different so-called maintainers of what they believe was the remnants of this civilization. They have different ways and different aspects or facets of what they have as their mystery objects. For instance, you have a green product which you really like from a health food shop. Eventually it becomes Whole Foods and it goes into other supermarkets, and then it's repackaged. And that's when you have to look at the small print. You'll find that a poison has been added. So a lie has been introduced. And the purpose of having a lie at different levels is that the anthropos of man, who's at the ontological being of every individual, uniquely and completely and totally uniquely embodied, cannot hold on to any particular exterior truth. Rather, it has to rely on the absolute omni-dimensional security, rather than national security, which is the source of consciousness itself, anthropic sentience. Can apply that through compassionate love. This is the real revolution, as it's been demonstrated empirically with pilots, and anyone can download in a balance and what is it, $60 for the clip-on on your iPad or other device, and can rapidly see coherency and the part of oneself that collapses the wave particle of coherence to non-coherence, so you can phase cancel that. You can show your neighbor, your children, you learn a few simple breathing techniques. You don't need it anymore. You know what it is, but you have this objective parameter and you can focus it on DNA, and we're liberated from genetic robots. And the next step of that is, of course, the stem cell revolution. We're waiting to see if they succeed with that. These things take time. I would expect that something in that direction will emerge, in my understanding of reality. The super civilization is basically past, present, and future, so it is a oneness. So it knows the veritas, knows the great all-one truth that is irreversible and invariant. But for an entertainment system, or for a greater omni-universal, rather than just universal or multiversal state, planet Earth and planets like planet Earth are very useful constructs for us, because as a result, we are surrounded by truth, by the best abstracts of what we have experienced, filled with little lies, which is the sleep universal sleep, so that we must each, on an individual level, realize this ontological foundation of anthropic sentience and biological coherence, and that's the purpose of this. This is the extraordinary thing of what's going on today, and a wonderful thing of of this time now, where such drastic opposites are happening.
Mm-hmm.
Very specific programs. I mean, the understanding from the mystery schools on Adam Kadmon has been distorted in so many different levels. The Anthropos Rotunda of Jung was quite accurate. It was the flying saucer, the ultimate archetype, the exteriorization of the soul or psyche, interiorization of the body. That is pretty much what is as the starship, which pretty much describes what is the lens of the Rig Veda, the Vata Rata, the chariot of the sun and the moon that makes this vortex that then goes into a sphere and it unifies all the opposites of the body to primordial matter or primordial reality or hadronic fusion, if we put it in a modern context that is being observed in hadronic chemistry. So this present time is like a diamond factory. It's an alchemical laboratory. It's something of our own design. Yet some really horrible things are also manifesting in strengths, which are balanced out by these extraordinary aspects that are emerging. Very important in all this, I think, is that, and this is especially clear for people who've done high-dose entheogens or near-death experiences or out-of-body experiences or UFO contacts, is that consciousness is not touched by anything.
Yeah.
It's pristine, and going on that foundation and knowing that that is the practice moment by moment and utilizing then things like compassion. I mean, one can go through horrific states in entheogenics and somagenic states of ego death, which I think are extremely valid. I was quite, I'm paying attention to the psytrance movements, especially dark psytrance, having just introduced it as a new phase for dark side trance, which is even faster, because I'm noticing that the previous effect, that dark enlightenment as it's called, it basically chops up civilization conditioning. All of the somatic conditioning that one has been conditioned into, it's just too much. So you have to go through it, you work through it. It's very interesting to see that some of the pilots that come through and with very clear cognizance. This year I found it took a long time, a lot of work. Some of the dark psytrance I really didn't like myself. And I make some, that's one of the many genres I make. But the result on Sunday was a lot of people with clear cognition. How long that is maintained, we will see, but it was more than last year. So we've introduced now, because what I started noticing is that because the BPM is about 145 BPM, we prefer 144, and the dark side can be 180 BPM. We were suggesting 288. So we discovered when we took 288 BPM, it all becomes slow again. And this is multiples of the circadian pulse. So the heart, at the moment of love, centers to about 72 BPM. Even before the heart is formed, there is a pulse of 72 BPM. 72 BPM circadian pulse tunes all of the endocrine gland systems, which each have different time systems. So in our ambient music, we use 72 BPM, or as half 36, and 144 for our trance, melodic trance, and first side, and 216 BPM, which is then 3 times 72 for one of the new fast forms of psytrance, but also 432 hertz. We put 8 hertz throughout on the low frequency oscillators, on the panning of the drums, so that as all those sound waves are hitting one, 8 hertz is being remembered. And what 432 hertz was demonstrated medically with the studies on the amelioration of psychiatric syndromes with headphones was when classical music at French concert pitch 432 hertz was listened to for 18 months, and the control group would listen to classical music at 440 hertz. The group that listened to 432 hertz had a complete amelioration or healing of various psychotic psychiatric syndromes, including depression and schizophrenia, paranoid schizophrenia, etc. And they found the mechanism was plasticity in the brain by synchronization and the synchronization of the brain's cycles. So 432 hertz, which is 54 times 8 hertz, itself has 8 hertz corrective mechanism, and that was with headphones. Now, when that's with speakers, you're getting a much more macro effect. That's a whole subject matter unto itself.
Where can people find music that is made this way with these frequencies?
So, which we call Omega 432 hertz music. 432hertz.com, both spellings. The HZ, 432hz.com, is about to become a music download platform for all genres and no junk quality, no junk food quality. So no MP3, no MP4. It's going to be minimum CD quality, 44,100 kilohertz, 16-bit, but also much higher. Studio quality, 48,000. And going to 24-bit and 192,000, etc. And this form is called medical grade because scientist Dr. Nicola Limardo has done years of analysis with some of our songs and demonstrated that this mixture, 8 hertz, 432 hertz, circadian pulses, and another aspect which I call UFOM, Unified Field Overall Mastering, which is genetic, binomial, golden numbers on every level of the mastering, has a synergetic effect on specific systems of the body, circadian system, the somatic system, the neural system, the heart system, cardiac system, change of charge parity of cells to have resistance to geopathic stress, which he measures with a frequency hammer that costs about 24,000 euros, and hospital equipment, etc. We're going to be offering that to all different kinds of artists to help them go to medical grade 432 hertz music. People out there should realize that down-tuned music from 440 hertz to 432 hertz, 75% is lost in the quality. So you've got to compose. If you're using natural instruments like a guitar, you've got to get custom-made coiled strings for 432 hertz. The strings for pianos, for bass guitars, for guitars are coiled for 440 hertz. I know that Manson Strings in England are custom making 432 hertz strings, so the solution is there for people who are wanting to play without digitalizing. What is interesting, though, is that the hadronic horizon is digital. And the femto technology uses the invariance of the hyperdense hadronic material and the etherino to produce a quasi-crystal system. The quasi-crystal system then is reduced to, let's say, a cube, which goes on the y-axis 4 times to itself 72 degrees, or 432 degrees if you take the circle, the sphere, which is 360 degrees, at 72 plus, 72 minus, 432 degrees plus, minus if you take the whole thing. So it's another aspect of 432. Then you produce a dodecahedron, which can then grow pentahedras in a binomial form, which can go then into an icosahedron, which can be filled with binomial triangles and grow tetrahedrons, which are binomial or Sierpinski tetrahedrons into dodecahedrons, and these become self-assembly quasi-crystalline systems, which uses the hadronic horizon itself, which is the summation of every personal and impersonal moment in the heart of every atom. That technology, I believe, is already backfiring all the nanotechnology projects and possible technology projects. I think this is a big disheartenment for those who thought they would get a power trip on this, maybe momentarily in some places, but tech is the technology of the universe, and it's invariant. So this is a very interesting aspect. Once you've got this assembled, and Dr. Eric Trell has got the specifics on this. He's formulated those with his Daphne equations. And all of the amino acids that make the DNA molecule have been corrected by the Rutherford model. So they're are understood exactly with the Santilli-Rutherford correction. Then the self-assembly system digitally literally can reformulate the DNA molecule, but it uses the foundation of the heart of the atom, which is also the heart of our consciousness, which actually has an invariant, irreversible foundation. And the etherino has been demonstrated to that extent.
Wow. Okay. So we are basically creators of pure consciousness. We are the ones creating matter as we see it manifest around us.
Not exactly. I just so we have we have set up our servers. We've set up our hyper holographic technology, which is interactive with the super and hyper civilizations. And then we become VR in that topological system from a past, present, and future state. And our consciousness cannot be reduced. It is that past, present, and future state and beyond. But in terms of our DNA, we were not able to affect our DNA directly by consciousness. Any other state except compassionate love does not change the DNA. So the observer effect of collapsing the wave function, that is the dream, maintaining the universal dream, that aspect, yes, indeed, we've been affecting and dreaming. We've been maintaining a dream. With ruthenium, if you excite ruthenium with microwaves, it will become invisible. It will go to a Meissner field. It will go to M state.
You're talking about ruthenium, the metal?
Yeah. So the ruthenium experiment is with microwaves was brought into an M state or a Cooper superconductivity, and that is high excitation with microwaves, and it disappears because superconductors don't resist. They have zero electrical resistance. So the planet is electrical resistance. The solar system's electrical resistance. So the planet appears to go around the sun. Planets appear to go around the sun. And the galaxy is electrical resistance, and the universe is electrical resistance. Zero electrical resistance, no path of resistance to hold you. So you are past, present, and future. That's one form of superconductivity, Cooper pair superconductivity. Now, when the scientists flashed laser light as the ruthenium was being excited,
what color? What frequency laser light?
I don't recall right now, but I think it was blue and red laser.
Okay.
So the more flashes per second, that was the point. At 64 flashes per second, 75% of the ruthenium being observed by the scientists.
Yeah.
75% did not become a high spin state. So here you have the anthropos as the universal dreamer maintaining the dream. This is where the observer is maintaining the dream. It's not exactly creating; it's co-creating. And when the idea of the anthropos in the Vedas was also in my contacts is that the cosmic Christ or omniversal persona decides it wants to have a dream, it wants to have a sleep, it wants to have some rest, and that dream is the universe. In order to have a dream, you need to rest properly. So you want to have good quality dreams, even
of course.
Yeah, it must be good quality, whether it's nice or nightmares. It must be good quality, so we sleep properly. And so that's the maintenance of the dream. And that's also the factor of the observer affecting the collapse of the wave function, ruthenium. The graphene experiment of 1928, you're probably familiar with, where graphene, if it's energized, it just becomes a blob on the wall. But if scientists, with their ontological being, observe exact lensing of the energetic system that's going to be put through the lens, making a lens by exact geometrical angles of observation, then something else happens to the graphite. The graphite becomes suddenly a geometrical manifestation where every single bit of the trillions of bits of the graphene knows where every other bit is because of observation, the lens of observation. No lens made by the scientists, it's just a blob. Dr. David Bohm observed when he raised his midway path finger, which is a forwards middle finger, not backwards, in our semantic demonstration. When he raised his midway finger to the other scientists at Los Alamos National Laboratory, said it's an assumption that you can say that you can separate the different fields into separate fields, because where does the air of the whirlpool end and the water begin? You can't define it because it's a dynamic system. Like life is a dynamic system. It's not static like crystals or metals, except he found that when metals were excited in a high charge state, all the electrons appeared to know where all of the other billions of electrons were. It would be as if everyone on planet Earth would lift up their right leg at the same time. So from that, he developed post-quantum mechanics. And this directly ties into hadronic physics, which has proven this exactly. He didn't have that yet. But he developed then that you have one electron in the universe. But Roger Satinelli in the 50s already defined an electron as an oscillation of emptiness, and in accordance to an infinitely rigid ether. So,
please say that again.
Well, matter, in other words, matter is immaculately empty, and space is infinitely filled, an infinitely rigid ether, and electrons are oscillations of emptiness in relation to that infinitely rigid ether, giving the illusion of motion, but they're actually empty. Dr. David Bohm then suggested that there is only one electron in the universe. He said, see it like this. You've got an aquarium, you've got a fish in the middle, and you've got 6 cameras around filming the fish, and 6 TV screens. On the 6 screens, as the fish moves, it looks like the fish is moving in a different direction, just like all of those excited electrons in the metal. And then he brought that into he had to bring the implicate order into an omnidimensional model to be able to account for the electrons that make the cameras, that make the screens, that make the aquarium, etc., etc. But that's been dealt with exactly and completely in hadronic.
But that gives a whole different definition of what oneness is.
It becomes all oneness.
Yeah.
And where all is zero, or an eternal vagina, we like to say poetically, that it's only an eternal vagina that can hold an infinite penis. And it is the undulation of this infinitely rigid ether to this eternal holy spirit, or holiness, or vacuum, that enables the modulation between the coexistence of both, which would be our reality and things like that.
Okay, well, that takes Tantra yoga to a whole new level.
This is Tantra yoga, actually. This Anuttara Yoga Tantra, which includes the 108 plants through the 108 illusions.
Yeah. Okay, so I think people got overload of information already by now, so maybe we should
this was a little